Now to a story about a master bush craftsman. For decades, Doug Kite has worked leather in the most extraordinary of ways with incredible skill. His plaiting and braiding is remarkable, and so too his life story. At 92 and slowing down, Doug Kite has just donated the best of his collection to the Museum of Victoria, as Tim Lee reports.
See, that's turned upside round.
For more than 30 years, Doug Kite has practised a rare craft. Toiling away in a cluttered workshop in an outer Melbourne suburb, his plaited goods are highly sought by collectors around the world, though he's not a man to skite.
Most of the others are much better than me with their whip making and all that, I reckon anyway.
Doug Kite is 92, and though he's slowing down, he's still plaiting.
He's a classic, modest, incredibly talented man, but he also appreciates the value of this type of artwork, and it's a rare trade. It's something that really is not well understood by those who don't do it. So a lot of times when he's been showing his work to other people, they've probably disregarded the extraordinary detail and effort and skill involved in it.
But Doug Kite's art and the story behind it hasn't escaped the attention of the Museum of Victoria. For the past year, Lisa Dale Hallett has been documenting his craft and his life story.
He's spent years perfecting, constantly perfecting, never arriving at perfection because he, of course, is a perfectionist, and really pushing leather braiding into areas that most people wouldn't think of. Earrings that are made of in the shape of a gum nut, and a braided footstool, all sorts of unusual, interesting things.
The leatherwork is crafted from kangaroo hide, and Doug Kite has invented and made many of the tools he uses to slice and trim the lace into delicately fine threads, which he then plaits.
And this is really rare. Have you come across anyone else who does braiding around
probably
corners?
Not as silly as me.
Leather hat bands are a traditional Australian custom. These are a couple of fairly typical examples. And these are a couple of Doug Kites. It looks like barbed wire, but it's actually made of leather. And this has become his signature. It's a miniature stock whip, so true to scale you can actually crack it. Not that you ever would.
We're familiar with belts and hat bands, but perhaps not so to the degree that Doug's created with that sort of fine, really fine, elegant work. The miniature whip for the hat band is unlike anything else that you'd see anywhere in Australia, and it's been collected and made for people in Australia, and it's also found its way across to America. So there's some really exceptional craft work here.
Cattle producer Peter Cox is a big admirer.
Doesn't matter where I go in Australia, people comment, where did you get that hat band? It's unique. It's tremendous. Yeah, with his fine plaiting is just second to none. You go anywhere in the world and you'll never see anything like that.
Several decades ago, the stock whip hat band was the reason Shane Patterson and his family came to get to know Doug Kite.
But Dad met him at the races one day at Sandown. He was standing near the parade ring, he had a hat on, and he had a little stock whip that he plaited as a hat band. Paddy.
The Melbourne saddler is another big fan.
He's made a lot of little stock whips, and we've sold a lot for him, but he's made stock whips for me, driving whips, ties, it's everything. I think there's a cup and a saucer. Anything he puts his mind to, he can plait.
On most Saturdays, you'll find Shane Patterson and his brother Peter at the races as clerks of the course, mounted on grey horses. It's a family tradition. Their father John recently retired after riding the rails for nearly 40 years. This is one of Shane's impressive custom-made saddles.
I put a crocodile seat in it. It doesn't make him ride any better, but something different. Yeah. Fair bit of work went into it, time consuming.
Rather like Doug Kite's plaiting.
It's not just an art form and it's not just functional, it's actually a mathematical process that Doug's been undertaking.
It always starts rough.
He's had to decipher pattern, form, function, shape.
Over that one, under that one, see? See how it's starting to come over the three?
Yep. And there's no manual here, there's no book that tells him how to do this. What's the name of this pattern that you're doing?
This is just under 3 over 3.
One of the things that's so remarkable is the fact he's been able to actually work it out for himself.
Get the idea of it. Leave it at that, I think.
Not bad for someone who had next to no formal education.
Doug describes that he's only ever spent 2 lots of 6 months at school before he was 12.
His parents worked on cattle stations. His father did stock work, dug wells and dams, and the family led an itinerant life through outback South Australia.
Digging dams, he was checking wells, he was checking fence lines.
They were a very tough time when you think of the old man of that, as kids didn't worry about, what kids are like.
Doug Kite didn't live in a house until he was 6. The family cottage in Maree has long since gone. And this is Doug, some years ago, next to the family wagon they used to live in.
Just like a tent, in a way, on top of the wagon. And Mum and all used to sleep up there, and we used to sleep up there as kids.
6 years living on the back of a wagon in an environment that is one of the most severe environments in Australia. Dust storms that cover cattle, temperatures in the 50s in the summer, extreme environment which most people can't imagine, but that was his first 6 years.
I started work before I was 12. In 1935, it was about October. So you could leave school at 12 those days. And I was about 11 and something, so they said, oh, you can go,
Doug Kite did station work, became a drover and helped move great mobs of cattle down the Birdsville track. Many of the mobs belonged to Australia's cattle king, Sydney Kidman.
There's a beautiful layering of story that goes back to Doug's early days growing up in Farina in the Maree district and really being part of that land beyond the fence line, that sense of being part of this larger story that relates to the pastoral history of Australia.
He saw the last of the Afghan camel trains. By the early 1930s, they'd mostly gone, replaced by motorised transport. Doug Kite taught himself the accordion and learnt this song, played by cameleers around the campfire and at funerals. And it was camels in 1946 that brought Doug and his brother from the outback to the city.
They originally started out with 14 camels to bring to a zoo in Balwyn.
His brother went back. Doug eventually decided to stay.
But he's very much wedded to and connected to that landscape and the memories it holds for him.
Doug Kite is a founding member of the Australasian Whipmakers and Platters Association that began in the 1980s with the aim of preserving traditional bush skills such as leatherwork.
And that's what he's been doing here. He's invented any number of braiding techniques that no one else has even tried or thought about.
You can do almost anything with it, if you want to.
Many leatherworkers are highly secretive. Not so Doug.
I reckon that's silly, because if you've got something you reckon is better, well, why not tell people or show people?
Over the years, he has taught his craft to many, and now he has donated his collection to Museum Victoria.
Once we've collected a collection of this kind, there's quite a lot of work involved in documenting it,
That's 550mm long.
Each item is registered, described, measured, photographed. Just try that.
Ready?
Yep. It needs to be assessed by conservation staff. In fact, we need to put it in a cool store, which is minus 20 degrees for 2 or 3 weeks. And all of this is about preservation, accessible through our Collections Online website.
It's hoped in future it will go on show in Melbourne and elsewhere around the country.
You know, in years to come, people will look at them and say, Joe, who made these and how detailed they are.
Yeah, I reckon it's great, yeah, to put it on show and for him to be recognised. That's the thing. I mean, he's pretty quiet and he don't like a lot of hype and all that, but I think it's good to be out there and seeing now what he has done.
I think that's the case. I think he's really proud of the work that he's done, as he should be, because it is exceptional. I think also he hasn't stopped making, so I don't doubt that there'll be some more things coming our way.
So what does the man himself make of all the fuss?
Well, I suppose it's better than leaving them in the shed here with someone to throw out, isn't it? That's what I think, anyway.